I opened my front door to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch, her lips pressed so tight they'd turned white, clutching a laminated HOA handbook like it was the Constitution itself. "Mr. Harrison, that shed needs to come down immediately," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. Section 12. Paragraph 4 clearly states that temporary structures may only remain on properties from November 1st through March 31st, and today is April 2nd. I glanced past her toward my backyard where my winter storage shed sat exactly where I'd placed it 5 months ago. The thing was perfectly maintained, painted to match my house and tucked neatly against my back fence. I'd used it all winter to store my snow blower, winter tires, salt bags, and various seasonal equipment that would otherwise clutter my garage. "Patricia, it's 2 days past the deadline," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm planning to take it down this weekend when my brother can help me." "The rules are the rules, Garrett," she snapped. "You have 48 hours or the HOA will impose daily fines of $100. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back to her white SUV, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I'd lived in this Denver suburb neighborhood for 8 years, and every year it seemed like Patricia found new ways to make everyone's lives miserable. She'd been the HOA president for 3 years now, and her reign of terror had driven out 5 families already. I called my brother Marcus that evening, but he'd thrown his back out helping a friend move. My neighbor Tom couldn't help either. His wife Melissa had just had surgery. By the time the 48 hours were up, I still hadn't found anyone available to help me dismantle the 12 by 8-foot structure. True to her word, Patricia sent me a certified letter on April 5th informing me that I was now being fined $100 per day. I immediately sent an email to the HOA board explaining the situation and requesting a 2-week extension. 3 days passed with no response. On April 8th, I received another letter. This one informed me that, in addition to the daily fines, the HOA was now demanding I pay an additional $500 administrative fee for the continued violation. The letter also stated that if the shed wasn't removed within 7 days, they would hire contractors to remove it themselves and bill me for the work, plus another $1,000 administrative fee. That's when I decided to get creative. I spent the next evening researching HOA laws in Colorado and reading through every single page of our community's covenants and bylaws. What I discovered was fascinating. The rule about temporary structures applied to structures erected on the property, but there was nothing in the bylaws about moving existing structures to different locations, as long as they met certain criteria. More importantly, I found that the HOA maintained a community emergency supply storage area in the shared park space behind the recreation center. And according to the bylaws, any storage structure in that area had to be maintained by the HOA but could be accessed by any homeowner in case of emergency. The next morning, I called a moving company that specialized in shed relocation. "How much would it cost to move my shed about 200 yards?" I asked. "Depends on the size and terrain," the guy said, "but probably around $800. "Do it," I said. "I want it moved tomorrow." I carefully reviewed the bylaws again that night. The community emergency storage area was defined as the fenced area adjacent to the recreation center parking lot, accessible to all homeowners. The bylaws stated that the HOA was required to maintain emergency supplies including water, non-perishable food, first aid supplies, and emergency equipment. The storage structure in that area had to be weather-resistant and secure. My shed was definitely weather-resistant and secure. The moving company arrived on April 10th at 8 in the morning. They lifted my shed onto a flatbed trailer using a small crane, then drove it slowly through the neighborhood to the recreation center. I'd already confirmed that the gate to the emergency storage area was unlocked, just as the bylaws required for emergency access. The current emergency supply shed was a run-down metal structure about half the size of mine, with a rusty door that barely closed. My shed looked like a palace next to it. We positioned my shed right next to the old one, and the crew carefully lowered it into place. I paid them, got my receipt, and stood back to admire my handiwork. Patricia's car came screeching into the parking lot about 20 minutes later. She must have had spies everywhere in this neighborhood. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, practically leaping out of her vehicle. "Following the bylaws," I said calmly. Section 12. Paragraph 4 states that temporary structures must be removed from private properties by March 31st. My shed is no longer on my private property. Problem solved. Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a deep purple. "You cannot just put your shed here. This is community property." Section 8, Paragraph 2, I continued, pulling out my phone where I'd bookmarked the relevant sections. "The community emergency storage area may contain weather-resistant and secure storage structures for the purpose of maintaining emergency supplies. My shed meets those criteria." "But that's not what that means," she sputtered. "Really? What does it mean then?" She opened and closed her mouth several times, looking like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she managed, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. This is completely inappropriate." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, I'm in full compliance with the bylaws." She stormed off, and I went home feeling pretty satisfied with myself. But I wasn't done yet. Over the next 2 days, I made several trips to the recreation center. Since my shed was now part of the community emergency storage area, and since the bylaws stated that the HOA was responsible for maintaining emergency supplies in this area, I decided to help them out. The old metal shed was unlocked, as required by the emergency access rules, so I took a look inside. What I found was shocking. There were maybe a dozen bottles of water, all expired. A few dusty boxes of crackers from 2019. One measly first aid kit that looked like it came from a dollar store. No emergency blankets, no flashlights, no batteries, no real supplies whatsoever. For a community of 200 homes, this was pathetic and potentially dangerous. I documented everything with photos and video, then sent a formal complaint to the board citing specific bylaws about their responsibility to maintain adequate emergency supplies. I CC'd the County Emergency Management Office for good measure. Then I did something that would really get under Patricia's skin. I started moving actual emergency supplies into my shed. I'd always been a bit of a prepper, nothing crazy, just someone who believed in being prepared. Over the years, I'd accumulated a substantial collection of emergency supplies. Cases of water, MRE, medical supplies, battery-powered radios, flashlights, emergency blankets, a generator, fuel cans, tools, and more. I figured if the HOA wasn't going to properly maintain the emergency supplies, I would. I moved about 60% of my personal emergency supplies into my shed in the community storage area. I kept detailed records of everything, including receipts proving I'd purchased all of it with my own money. I even installed a simple lock on my shed, but kept a key in the combination lockbox mounted outside, with the combination posted on the door per the emergency access requirements. The emergency board meeting happened on April 13th. I received notice only the day before, which actually violated their own bylaws about proper notice for board meetings, but I showed up anyway. Patricia sat at the head of the table in the recreation center's meeting room, flanked by the other board members. Robert Chen, the treasurer, Linda Morrison, the secretary, and David Kowalski, the member-at-large. About 15 other homeowners had shown up, clearly curious about the drama. "This meeting is called to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. "We're here to address the unauthorized placement of a structure in the community emergency storage area by Garrett Harrison." "Point of order," I said, standing up. "The structure is completely authorized under Section 8, Paragraph 2 of the bylaws. I submitted written notification to the board 3 days ago as required." "You did no such thing," Patricia snapped. I held up my phone. "I have the email right here, sent to all 4 board members on April 10th at 2:47 p.m. I also have the read receipts showing that all 4 of you opened it." Robert Chen shifted uncomfortably. "I did receive that email, Patricia." She shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Regardless, the intent of that section is for HOA-owned structures, not personal property." "The bylaws don't specify ownership," I countered. "They only specify that structures in that area must be weather-resistant and secure, which mine is. Furthermore, I've documented the complete lack of adequate emergency supplies in the HOA's existing structure, which is a direct violation of Section 8, Paragraph 1, which requires the HOA to maintain sufficient emergency supplies for community use." I pulled out my printed photos and passed them around. The other homeowners leaned in to look, murmuring among themselves. "Those supplies are adequate," Patricia insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. 12 bottles of expired water for 200 homes," said Tom Williams, one of my neighbors. "That's a joke. What if there's actually an emergency?" "And I noticed the HOA collected a special assessment of $50 per household last year specifically for emergency preparedness," added Melissa Santos, another homeowner. "Where did that money go?" Patricia's face was turning red again. "Those funds were used for various community improvements." "Such as?" I asked. "That's none of your concern." "Actually, it is," said Robert Chen quietly. "As treasurer, I should probably clarify that those funds are still in the emergency preparedness account. We haven't spent them yet because Patricia said she was getting quotes for supplies." "I am getting quotes," Patricia said through gritted teeth, "for 10 months. Robert looked uncomfortable but continued. "I've been asking for updates since last June." The room erupted in conversation. Several homeowners started demanding answers about the emergency fund. Patricia tried to regain control by banging her gavel repeatedly, but it wasn't working. Finally, she stood up and shouted, "Everyone shut up!" The room went silent. "Garrett Harrison's shed is not approved, and I'm calling for a board vote to have it removed immediately at his expense. All in favor?" Patricia raised her hand. Nobody else did. "Robert," she said sharply. "I vote no," he said. "Garrett's right. The bylaws don't prohibit it, and frankly, he's providing a service we should have been providing all along." Linda Morrison looked nervous. "I also vote no. I think we should be thanking him, not punishing him." David Kowalski shook his head. "No, this is ridiculous, Patricia. You're the one who violated the bylaws by not maintaining proper emergency supplies." Patricia looked like she might spontaneously combust. "Fine. Meeting adjourned." She grabbed her papers and stormed out, leaving the rest of the board sitting there awkwardly. After the meeting, several homeowners came up to thank me and ask questions about the emergency supplies. Tom Williams asked if I'd be willing to do an inventory of what was really needed for the community. I agreed, happy to help. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. The HOA was suing me for unauthorized use of community property and seeking damages of $10,000 plus attorney fees. They also claimed I was hoarding community resources by storing personal emergency supplies in the community storage area. I immediately called a lawyer. His name was Frank Morrison, no relation to Linda the secretary, and he specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing all my documentation, he actually laughed. "They don't have a case," he said. "You followed the bylaws to the letter. In fact, based on what you've shown me, they've violated their own bylaws in multiple ways. We could countersue." "I don't want to sue them," I said. "I just want them to leave me alone. Then let's respond to their suit and see if we can get it dismissed, but keep documenting everything." The lawsuit process dragged on through May and into June. During that time, Patricia escalated her campaign against me. She sent me violation notices for my lawn being a quarter-inch too tall. She complained that my garbage cans were visible from the street 10 minutes before the allowed time. She even tried to fine me because my house numbers were not the approved font. Every single complaint was petty and baseless, and my lawyer shot them all down. But it was exhausting and stressful. I started keeping a log of every interaction with Patricia and the HOA, time-stamped and detailed. Then something interesting happened in early June. I was checking on the supplies in my shed one evening when I noticed the old HOA shed's door was open. I walked over to investigate and found Patricia inside with a hand truck, loading up the few remaining supplies from the old shed. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped, clearly not expecting anyone. "That's none of your business. This is HOA property." "Sure, but why are you moving it?" "We're reorganizing," she said curtly. Wheeling the hand truck toward her SUV, I watched as she loaded the supplies into her vehicle. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I took photos of her loading up her SUV and made a note of the date and time. Over the next week, I noticed Patricia making several trips to the old shed, each time removing items. The shed was now completely empty. I mentioned it to Robert Chen when I ran into him at the grocery store. "She's moving emergency supplies," he asked, looking confused. "She didn't mention anything about that to the board." "Maybe you should ask her about it," I suggested. Robert promised he would. 2 days later, he called me. "Garrett, we have a problem," he said. I asked Patricia about the emergency supplies, and she said she moved them to a more secure location. But when I asked where, she refused to tell me. She said it was on a need-to-know basis for security reasons. That doesn't sound right. It's not right. The bylaws require transparency about community property. I'm calling for a board meeting to address this, but I need to give proper notice, which means it won't happen for another week. "Keep me posted," I said. The board meeting took place on June 16th. This time the room was packed. Word had spread about Patricia's suspicious behavior, and homeowners wanted answers. I sat in the back, content to observe. Robert Chen opened the meeting. "We're here to discuss the location and status of community emergency supplies that were previously stored in the community storage area. Patricia, can you please inform the board and the community where these supplies are currently located?" Patricia stood up, her expression defiant. "As I told you, Robert, they've been moved to a secure location for safety reasons. The exact location is confidential to prevent theft. The bylaws require that emergency supplies be accessible to homeowners in case of emergency," Linda Morrison said, reading from the handbook. "How can they be accessible if no one knows where they are?" "I know where they are," Patricia shot back. "In a real emergency, I'll distribute them." "What if you're not available?" David Kowalski asked. What if the emergency happens when you're out of town or unreachable? That's unlikely. But possible, David pressed. Patricia, this is unacceptable. You need to tell us where the supplies are. I don't need to do anything, Patricia said, her voice rising. I'm the president of this HOA, and I make decisions for the safety and security of this community. That's not how this works, Robert said firmly. The board makes decisions collectively, not unilaterally. I'm calling for a vote to require you to disclose the location of the emergency supplies. All in favor. Robert, Linda, and David all raised their hands. Motion passes, Robert said. Patricia, where are the supplies? Patricia grabbed her purse and stood up. I don't have to answer to you people. This meeting is over. You can't just adjourn the meeting, Linda protested. You're not the only board member, but Patricia was already walking out. The room erupted in chaos, with homeowners shouting questions and complaints. Robert tried to restore order, eventually suggesting that they continue the meeting without Patricia. I move that we appoint an interim president until this situation is resolved, David said. I nominate Robert Chen. The vote was unanimous among the remaining board members. Robert looked overwhelmed but accepted the nomination. First order of business, he said. We need to find out where Patricia took those supplies. Does anyone have any ideas? Check her house, someone suggested. We can't just search her house, Robert said. That would be illegal. What if we file a police report? Tom Williams asked. She essentially stole community property. That got everyone thinking. The emergency supplies might have been minimal, but they were still purchased with HOA funds, which meant they belonged to the community, not to Patricia personally. Robert looked at me. Garrett, you took photos of everything that was in that shed, right? I did, I confirmed. I also have video of Patricia loading supplies into her SUV on multiple occasions. Would you be willing to share that with the police if we file a report? Absolutely. The next morning, Robert, David, Linda, and I went to the local police station to file a report. We explained the situation to Officer Martinez, showing him the bylaws, the photos, and the videos of Patricia removing the supplies. This is technically a civil matter, Officer Martinez said initially. HOA disputes usually are. But she removed community property without board approval, Robert explained. Property purchased with funds collected from all homeowners. Doesn't that constitute theft? Officer Martinez considered this. How much would you estimate the supplies were worth? We calculated based on the receipts from when the HOA had purchased them years ago. Even accounting for the expired water and old crackers, it came to around $800. And she refuses to return them or even disclose where they are, Officer Martinez asked. Correct, Robert confirmed. Let me talk to my sergeant, Officer Martinez said. This is a bit unusual. We waited while he consulted with his supervisor. After about 20 minutes, they both came back. We can do a welfare check, the sergeant said. If we observe stolen property in plain sight during that welfare check, we can take action. But I need to be clear. If the property isn't visible, we can't search her house without a warrant, and getting a warrant for an HOA dispute is going to be tough. A welfare check on what grounds? Linda asked. Several community members are concerned about their HOA president's erratic behavior and want to ensure she's okay, the sergeant said with a slight smile. It's not unusual for us to do welfare checks when people report concerning behavior. We agreed to that approach. 2 officers accompanied Robert to Patricia's house that afternoon. I wasn't there, but Robert called me right after to tell me what happened. It was incredible, Robert said, sounding almost giddy. Patricia answered the door, and the officers explained they were doing a welfare check. She tried to refuse to talk to them, but they were very polite and persistent. While one officer was talking to her at the front door, the other one looked through the window into her garage. "And?" I asked. "Her garage is completely full of emergency supplies. Not just the stuff from the HOA shed, Garrett. Cases and cases of water, food, medical supplies, batteries, you name it. Way more than was ever in that old shed." She was hoarding supplies, I said, understanding dawning. That $10,000 emergency preparedness fund, she didn't get quotes. She bought supplies for herself. "Exactly," Robert said. The officer asked her about it and she started yelling about her property rights. Then she made the mistake of saying something like, "I used HOA funds to buy these because I'm the only one responsible enough to manage them." That's when they asked her to step outside. They arrested her. Not yet, but they are investigating. They asked for our financial records, which as treasurer I can provide. If she really did use $10,000 in HOA funds to buy personal supplies, that's embezzlement. My jaw dropped. This had escalated way beyond what I'd ever imagined when I moved my shed. Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The police investigation revealed that Patricia had indeed used the entire emergency preparedness fund to purchase supplies, which she'd stored in her own garage. Her plan, apparently, was to be the hero who distributed supplies during an emergency, controlling who got what based on who she liked. The investigation also revealed that she'd been skimming money from other HOA accounts for years. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there, always with vague invoices for administrative expenses or community improvements. Over her 3 years as president, she'd embezzled nearly $35,000. Patricia was arrested on June 24th and charged with embezzlement and theft. The HOA immediately removed her from the board and started the process of recovering the stolen funds. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd intended to use the supplies for the community, but the DA pointed out that keeping them in her personal garage and refusing to disclose their location proved otherwise. The lawsuit against me was immediately dropped, and the new board, led by Robert as president, passed a formal resolution thanking me for my dedication to community safety and emergency preparedness. They also voted to reimburse me for the $800 I'd spent to move my shed. But the story still wasn't over. With Patricia gone and the emergency preparedness fund frozen pending the criminal case, the community was left with no emergency supplies except what I'd stored in my shed. Robert approached me in early July with a proposal. The board voted unanimously, he said. "We'd like to purchase your emergency supplies at cost, to serve as the community's emergency stockpile until we can properly fund and organize our own program." "You don't have to purchase them," I said. "I moved them to the community storage area for everyone to use in an emergency." That was always the point. "That's generous, Garrett, but you spent your own money on those supplies. It's not fair to expect you to donate them." We compromised. I donated half the supplies outright and sold the other half to the HOA at cost. The board then appointed me as the volunteer emergency preparedness coordinator, responsible for maintaining and organizing the community's emergency supplies. I threw myself into the role. I created a detailed inventory system, established rotation schedules for perishable items, and organized training sessions for homeowners about emergency preparedness. We held community meetings where experts from the County Emergency Management Office came to speak. The program became so successful that other HOAs in the area started asking for advice on setting up their own emergency preparedness systems. My shed, which had started all this drama, became the centerpiece of the community's emergency preparedness program. We kept it right where I'd moved it, properly stocked and maintained. The old metal shed was removed and recycled. Patricia's criminal case went to trial in September. I attended several days of the proceedings, curious to see how it would end. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Beyond the embezzlement, investigators had discovered she'd been running similar schemes in 2 previous HOAs before moving to our neighborhood. She'd been forced out of both, but never prosecuted. This time, the DA wasn't letting her off easy. Patricia was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement and sentenced to 3 years in prison, with restitution to be paid to all 3 HOAs she'd stolen from. Her husband filed for divorce while she was awaiting sentencing. The trial revealed something else interesting. During her testimony, Patricia explained that she developed what her lawyer called an obsession with control after losing her job as a corporate manager 5 years earlier. Being HOA president was the only way she could feel powerful anymore. She'd convinced herself that she was the only person capable of making proper decisions for the community. It was sad in a way, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. Her need for control had cost 3 communities tens of thousands of dollars and created countless headaches for innocent homeowners just trying to live their lives. In October, the HOA held a special meeting to revise the bylaws. We added numerous checks and balances to prevent future abuse of power. No single board member could make financial decisions without approval from the majority. All expenditures over $100 required 2 signatures. Monthly financial reports had to be distributed to all homeowners, not just the board. And the Emergency Preparedness Fund was established as a restricted account that could only be used for its designated purpose, with quarterly audits. We also clarified the language about temporary structures and community property. My shed situation had exposed a loophole in the bylaws, and while it had worked in my favor, it needed to be addressed. The new language specified that homeowners could apply for approval to place structures in common areas for community benefit, with board approval required. My shed was grandfathered in as the official emergency supply storage structure. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though it was a better normal than before. The tyranny of Patricia's rule was gone, replaced by a board that actually listened to homeowners and worked collaboratively. The constant threat of arbitrary fines and violations disappeared. People started taking pride in the community again, instead of living in fear of the HOA. In November, we held our first community emergency preparedness drill. Over 100 homeowners participated, practicing how to access the emergency supplies, set up the community staging area, and communicate during a crisis. The County Emergency Management Office was so impressed they featured our program in their newsletter and asked if we'd be willing to help other communities set up similar programs. I agreed and spent several weekends that winter visiting other HOAs to share what we'd learned. It felt good to turn such a negative situation into something positive that could help people. My brother Marcus finally recovered from his back injury around Thanksgiving. We had dinner at my place, and as we sat on my back patio, he looked toward the empty spot where my winter storage shed used to sit. "You know, I still can't believe all this started because of a shed," he said. "Neither can I admitted. I was just trying to avoid a stupid fine." "You ended up taking down a criminal operation. That wasn't exactly my plan." "Best plans are the ones we don't make," Marcus said, raising his beer. "To your shed." "To the shed," I agreed, clinking my bottle against his. As winter approached again, I set up a smaller storage structure in my backyard for my personal seasonal items. This one was well within the size limits specified in the bylaws and didn't require board approval. I submitted paperwork for it anyway, just to be safe. Robert approved it within 24 hours with a note saying, "Thanks for keeping us in the loop, but you're being overly cautious at this point." The community sued Patricia for restitution in civil court, separate from the criminal case. Her house went into foreclosure, and the HOA received about $20,000 from the sale. It wasn't the full amount she'd stolen, but combined with her court-ordered restitution payments, we'd eventually recover most of it. The board voted to use the recovered funds to properly stock the emergency supplies, repave some community walkways, and finally fix the recreation center's failing HVAC system. In December, the local newspaper ran a feature story about our emergency preparedness program and the scandal that had led to its creation. The reporter interviewed me, Robert, and several other homeowners. The article painted Patricia as a cautionary tale about the dangers of HOA boards operating without oversight. It sparked conversations in HOAs across Colorado about governance reform and financial transparency. I even got a call from a state legislator who was considering introducing a bill to require greater oversight of HOA boards in Colorado. He asked if I'd be willing to testify if the bill moved forward. I said yes, hoping that something positive could come from all this chaos. Christmas Eve that year, the community held a holiday gathering at the recreation center. It was the first time in years that people actually seemed happy to attend a community event. There was food, music, and a general sense of relief that Patricia's reign of terror was finally over. Linda Morrison approached me with a wrapped package. "The board wanted to get you something," she said. "Just a small token of appreciation." I unwrapped it to find a plaque that read, "Garrett Harrison, Community Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. In recognition of your dedication to the safety and well-being of our community. We're mounting a larger version of this outside the emergency supply shed," Robert added, joining us, "so everyone knows who to thank." I was genuinely touched. What had started as a frustrating battle over a stupid shed had transformed into something meaningful. I'd made real friends in the community, helped establish a program that could genuinely save lives someday, and played a role in exposing corruption that had hurt a lot of people. "Thank you," I said, "but really, we all did this together." "Yeah, but you started it by being stubborn about a shed," Tom Williams said with a laugh. "Sometimes stubborn is exactly what's needed." As the party wound down and people headed home to their families, I stood outside the recreation center for a moment, looking at my shed in its new permanent home. It was lit up by the nearby streetlight, sturdy and reliable, packed with supplies that could help people in a real emergency. Who knew that refusing to back down over a winter storage shed would lead to all this? In trying to solve my own problem, I'd accidentally solved much bigger problems for the entire community. Patricia had counted on people being too afraid or too apathetic to challenge her authority. She'd gotten away with it for years across multiple HOAs because nobody had pushed back hard enough. All it took was one person refusing to be pushed around over something small to unravel the whole corrupt system. My shed was technically just a shed, but it represented something more important, the principle that rules should be applied fairly and that board members aren't dictators. New Year's Eve arrived, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The neighborhood was in good hands with Robert and the new board. The emergency preparedness program was thriving. Patricia was in prison and would be for a while. And my winter storage shed, the catalyst for all of this, was right where it needed to be, serving the community. As midnight approached and fireworks started lighting up the Denver sky, I thought about how much had changed in just 9 months. In April, I'd been a frustrated homeowner facing arbitrary fines from a petty tyrant. Now, in January, I was the emergency preparedness coordinator for a community that had come together to root out corruption and build something better, all because I moved a shed. The spring brought new growth to the neighborhood in more ways than one. Flowers bloomed in yards that had previously been maintained out of fear of violations rather than joy. People started talking to each other again, organizing block parties and community projects. The HOA transformed from an oppressive force into what it was supposed to be all along: a group of neighbors working together to maintain and improve their community. I continued my work as emergency preparedness coordinator, expanding the program to include CPR training, disaster planning workshops, and a community emergency communication network. We partnered with local fire and police departments to ensure our plans integrated with municipal emergency response systems. Other communities continued to reach out for guidance, and our little Denver suburb became known regionally as a model for community emergency preparedness. The state legislator who'd contacted me did introduce that HOA oversight bill, and I testified before a legislative committee in February. I told Patricia's story and explained how the lack of meaningful oversight had allowed her to operate unchecked for years. The bill passed in March, establishing new requirements for HOA financial transparency and board accountability across Colorado. It wasn't a perfect law, but it was a step in the right direction. My shed continued to sit in the community storage area, a constant reminder of how standing up for yourself, even over something small, can lead to unexpected and far-reaching changes. Every time I walked past it to check supplies or conduct an inventory, I smiled at the absurdity of how it all started. Patricia would be released from prison eventually, but she'd served her time and paid her debt to society. I didn't harbor any ill will toward her anymore. She'd been a deeply unhappy person who'd made terrible choices, and she'd faced the consequences. I hoped she'd get help and figure out how to live a better life after release. As for me, I'd learned valuable lessons about community, standing up for what's right, and the importance of holding leaders accountable. I'd also learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never intended to fight. That shed was supposed to store my snow blower, not expose embezzlement and transform a community. But life has a funny way of taking small acts of defiance and turning them into something bigger. My refusal to be bullied over 48 hours and $100 a day fine had cascaded into criminal charges, civil suits, legislative reform, and a complete transformation of how our HOA operated. Not because I set out to be a hero or expose corruption, but simply because I stood my ground over a principle. Years from now, when people tell the story of what happened in our neighborhood, they'll probably shake their heads at the absurdity of it all. A winter storage shed brought down an HOA president and reformed an entire system. It sounds like fiction, but it happened exactly that way. And that shed is still there, weatherproof and secure, exactly where I moved it on that April morning when I decided I'd had enough of Patricia Henderson and her arbitrary rules. It's filled with emergency supplies that I maintain and update regularly, ready to serve the community in a real crisis. It's become a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept tyranny, even the petty kind that wears a laminated handbook and pretends to be authority. Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to back down over something that matters to you, no matter how small it might seem to others. My shed mattered to me. The principle of fair treatment mattered to me. And because I stood firm on those things, an entire community benefited in ways I never could have predicted. That's the real story of how my winter storage shed ended up storing the community's emergency supplies instead of my snow blower, and how that simple act of defiance exposed corruption, reformed an HOA, and taught me that standing up for yourself matters more than you might think.